The argument didn't start in my office. It started in a parking garage where every sound echoed twice. I had just finished lunch with 3 people my son didn't even know existed. As I walked toward my car, I heard running footsteps behind me. "You're seriously not answering your phone?" I turned around. My son, Declan Pierce, was striding across the concrete with his suit jacket hanging over one shoulder. His face was already red. He wasn't here to talk. He was here to win. "I've been in meetings. I know where you've been." He pointed toward the restaurant upstairs. "You've been sneaking around behind my back. I unlocked my car. We're not doing this here." He slammed the driver's door shut before I could open it. "Oh, we are." Several people walking through the garage slowed down, not because we were shouting, because they recognized us. Pierce Industrial wasn't a small company. 3 generations had built it. Our trucks were on highways across 4 states. Employees knew my face. Most of them knew his. That made what happened next even worse. Declan grabbed the front of my jacket. "You think I'm stupid?" I calmly removed his hand. "I think you're angry." He laughed. "No, I think you're old." He shoved me backward, hard enough that my lower back struck the side of my own car. The impact knocked the wind out of me. For a second, I couldn't breathe. He leaned close enough that only I could hear the next sentence. "You're an old fool. You just don't know it yet." A security guard started walking toward us. Declan immediately stepped back, smoothed his tie, straightened his jacket. Amazing how quickly some people remember their manners when witnesses appear. "You all right, Mr. Pierce?" The guard looked at me. I nodded. "I'm fine." Declan smiled at the guard. "Family disagreement. Nothing to worry about." The guard wasn't convinced, neither was I, but he walked away. As soon as we were alone again, Declan shook his head. "You've made the biggest mistake of your life." I looked at him quietly. "No, I made it 39 years ago." He frowned. "What? When I convinced myself giving you everything would teach you gratitude." For a brief moment, his face hardened, then he laughed again. "You really think you're still in charge?" I smiled. "No, I know exactly who is." He thought I was talking about him. That was the funny part, because less than 2 hours earlier, I'd signed the final document ending the Pierce family's ownership of the company forever. And my son, the man who believed he was about to inherit everything, was the only executive who didn't know. "My name is Graham Pierce. I'm 70 years old. I started Pierce Industrial with 1 welding truck, a rented warehouse, and a bank loan so small the loan officer actually apologized while handing me the paperwork. We'd lend more if we thought you had a better chance." I thanked him anyway, because sometimes all you need is one person willing to bet a little. For the next 40 years, I worked every job inside that company. Driver, mechanic, salesman, janitor, forklift operator. There were nights I slept on a cot in the warehouse because we couldn't afford delays. By the time we celebrated our 30th anniversary, we employed over 800 people, not because I was brilliant, because I surrounded myself with people smarter than I was. That's how companies survive. Unfortunately, it's not how entitlement survives. Declan grew up believing the business would always be there. When he was 12, he used to ride beside me in delivery trucks during summer vacation. He'd tell everyone, "One day this will all be mine." Back then, it sounded adorable. By 25, it sounded dangerous. He stopped asking how the company worked, started asking when I'd retire. Bye-bye meetings bored him. Profit margins bored him. Fatty visits bored him. Titles fascinated him. Corner offices fascinated him. The word CEO fascinated him. Every conversation somehow circled back to the same question. "When are you finally stepping aside?" 3 years ago, I tried. I promoted him to Chief Operating Officer, not because he was ready, because I hoped responsibility would mature him. Instead, something else happened. He began acting as though the promotion had already made him owner. Department heads who disagreed with him suddenly disappeared. 30-year employees quietly resigned. Safety inspections were postponed because they were too expensive. Bonuses for warehouse staff vanished. Executive travel budgets doubled. One afternoon, I found him arguing with a machinist who'd worked for me since 1989. The man's name was Walter. He'd trained half the people in our fabrication division. Declan pointed toward the exit. "If you don't like my decisions, There's the door. Walter calmly removed his safety glasses. I remember changing your diapers in your father's office. Declan smiled. Then maybe it's time you retired too. Walter handed in his resignation before lunch. That afternoon, 5 more supervisors resigned with him. Not because of money, because respect had become optional. Over the next 18 months, the numbers told a story Declan refused to hear. Customer complaints doubled, employee turnover tripled, 2 major contracts disappeared, every quarterly meeting ended with the same explanation. The market's changing. No, leadership was. 6 months before the parking garage, an international manufacturing group contacted me privately. They weren't interested in buying equipment, they wanted the entire company. I refused, twice. Then their chairman asked me one question. What matters more, keeping the business in the family or protecting the people who built it? That question followed me for weeks. Eventually, I stopped asking whether my son deserved the company. I started asking whether the company deserved my son. The answers weren't the same. Back in the parking garage, Declan adjusted his cufflinks and smiled. I'll see you Monday at the board meeting. I've got something special planned. So do I. He climbed into his car and drove away. I watched his taillights disappear down the concrete ramp. Then I reached into my jacket pocket, pulled out my phone. A new message had just arrived from the chairman of the acquiring company. Everything is finalized. Monday morning belongs to you. I looked up toward the company headquarters rising above the parking garage. By this time next week, my son would still have his office, still have his title, still have his company car, but none of it would belong to him anymore. Monday mornings always smelled the same. Fresh coffee dropped into toner, machine oil drifting in from the fabrication floor. I'd walked into that headquarters thousands of times. That morning, it felt different, not because I knew what was coming, because I knew what was ending. When I stepped out of the elevator, something caught my attention. My office door. The brass nameplate that had read Graham Pierce, president for nearly 4 decades, was gone. In its place, a temporary plastic sign had been taped to the door. Executive conference room. I smiled. Someone had been busy over the weekend. My executive assistant, Renee, hurried toward me. She looked horrified. Mr. Pierce, I tried calling you, I know. I turned my phone off. They changed your office. I can see that. They told maintenance you approved it. I chuckled softly. I certainly did not. She lowered her voice. It wasn't the board. It was Declan. Of course it was. He wanted me to walk into the building already feeling defeated, a psychological victory before the real meeting even began. He'd always confused appearances with outcomes. Instead of asking questions, I carried my briefcase into the conference room. Someone had stacked my belongings inside cardboard boxes, family photographs, awards, the framed picture of our very first delivery truck, even the coffee mug my late wife had painted for me 30 years earlier. One of the handles had broken. I picked it up carefully, ran my thumb across the crack, then placed it back into the box. Funny, some things survive being broken, others don't. At precisely 9 o'clock, the board meeting began. 12 directors, corporate counsel, outside auditors, investment advisors. Declan entered last. Perfect navy suit, bright blue tie, confident smile. He looked around the room like a man arriving to his own coronation. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe today marks the beginning of a new chapter. Several board members exchanged quick glances. None of them answered. He mistook their silence for agreement. He stood at the front of the room and pressed a button. A presentation filled the screen. Leadership transition plan. My photograph appeared on the first slide. Below it, one sentence, retirement effective immediately. Declan smiled. My father has given everything to this company, and it's finally time he enjoys life. He looked toward me. I've prepared a complete retirement package. Interesting, I hadn't. He continued speaking. I'll assume executive authority today. I've already met individually with several department heads. We're ready. He spoke for almost 20 minutes. Charts, growth projections, expansion plans, new executive salaries. He'd planned every detail, except one. He never once asked whether I agreed to retire. Finally, he looked at me. Dad, if you'd like to say a few words. I slowly stood, carried my briefcase to the center of the room, closed his presentation with one click. The screen went black. Declan frowned. I wasn't finished. I know. Neither am I. I looked around the table. Some directors avoided eye contact, others looked relieved. I opened my briefcase, removed a single blue folder. No speeches, no dramatic gestures. I simply handed one copy to every director. Declan received his last. He looked down, then frowned. What is this? The future. He laughed. I already presented the future. No, you presented your expectations. I waited. The room became completely silent. Then he read the first page. His smile disappeared. He flipped another page, then another, faster each time. His breathing changed. What is this? The chairman of the board answered before I could. It's the finalized acquisition agreement. Declan looked up so quickly his chair nearly tipped over. Acquisition? The chairman nodded. As of 8 this morning, Pierce Industrial Cell has officially become a wholly owned subsidiary of Northbridge Manufacturing. The room stayed perfectly still, except for Declan. He stood so abruptly his chair crashed onto the floor. No one approved this. I did, I answered quietly. As majority shareholder, he stared at me. You sold the company? I protected it. You had no right. I had every legal right. His face turned crimson. You promised this business would stay in the family. I shook my head. I promised to protect the people who depended on it. They're not always the same promise. He slammed both hands onto the conference table. You did this because of one argument? I almost laughed. One argument? I looked toward Walter. Yes, Walter was there, sitting quietly beside the new ownership team. Declan hadn't even noticed him. Then I looked around the room. I didn't sell this company because you shoved me. I sold it because hundreds of people came to work every morning, afraid of the man who thought he already owned it. Silence. Heavy, painful, undeniable silence. Walter finally spoke. I delayed my retirement because Mr. Pierce asked me to meet the new owners. He smiled gently. They offered every employee the one thing we'd been losing. Declan frowned. What? Walter answered. Respect. Declan looked desperately around the room. Somebody say something. Nobody did, because every director already knew every signature had been completed, every approval had been filed, every wire transfer had cleared before sunrise. The company he'd planned to inherit had ceased to exist before breakfast. Then the new CEO stood, walked toward Declan, and held out an envelope. Mr. Pierce, we need to discuss your position. Declan reached for it confidently, still believing it contained his employment contract. He smiled again, until he opened it. Then every bit of color disappeared from his face. Declan stared at the letter once, twice, then a third time. He looked up. This has to be a joke. The new CEO didn't blink. It isn't. Declan held up the document. You're terminating me? No, read the second page. He turned it over. His hands began to shake. His executive employment agreement had been cancelled. His company credit cards were deactivated. His corporate vehicle was to be returned before 5 o'clock. His building access would expire in exactly 30 minutes. Even the company apartment he occasionally used during business trips was no longer available. He whispered, You can't do this. The CEO answered calmly, We already have. Declan threw the papers onto the conference table. This is because he poisoned all of you against me. The new chairman folded his hands. No. This is because we spent 6 months investigating the company before making an offer. Declan frowned. Investigating? We interviewed more than 100 employees. We reviewed safety reports, retention data, customer complaints, supplier contracts. He slid another folder across the table. You should read it. Declan opened it. The first page read, Executive Culture Assessment. Below it, one sentence had been highlighted. Operational risk is not the machinery. It is current executive leadership. His eyes moved faster. Each page became worse. Warehouse managers describing intimidation, customers documenting unanswered complaints, exit interviews, anonymous employee surveys, dozens of them. He looked at me. You collected this? I shook my head. No. They volunteered it. The new CEO continued. We don't buy companies. We buy people. The machines can be replaced. The buildings can be rebuilt. The right employees cannot. He nodded toward Walter. When your senior supervisors started resigning, We became interested. Declan stared at Walter. You talked to them? Walter smiled sadly. They called me, every single one. They didn't leave because they wanted higher salaries. They left because they no longer recognized the company. Declan suddenly pointed at me. So this was your plan? You wanted everyone against me. I answered quietly. No, I wanted you to succeed. I gave you 3 years. I defended you when managers complained. I paid consultants to coach you. I sent you to executive leadership programs. I even hired a retired CEO to mentor you. You fired him after 2 meetings. He challenged you. You don't like people who challenge you. For the first time, Declan had nothing to say, because every word was true. The general counsel cleared his throat. There's one remaining matter. He handed Declan another file. This concerns company expenditures authorized during your tenure. Declan looked annoyed. What now? Please open it. Inside were photographs, not invoices, photographs, luxury golf weekends, private yacht charters, designer furniture delivered to his home, family vacations, a wine collection. Every purchase had one thing in common. Each had been charged to corporate accounts. Declan laughed nervously. Executive expenses. The company's forensic accountant spoke for the first time. No, personal expenses. We verified every receipt. We also verified every destination. One image showed Declan's children riding jet skis in the Caribbean. Another showed a birthday party held at a luxury resort. Another, his backyard swimming pool under construction. The accountant calmly continued. The total amount exceeds $1,400,000. Nobody in the room moved, not even me. I hadn't known the number was that high. Declan looked around desperately. Those were approved. No, the accountant corrected him. They were submitted. You approved them yourself, if he frowned. I was cool. You didn't have authority to authorize personal expenditures. The silence afterward was deafening. Then came the final blow. The head of human resources entered carrying a small cardboard box, not dramatic, not symbolic, practical. She placed it in front of Declan. Your personal belongings from the executive office. He stared into the box, one framed family photo, a watch display, several awards, a custom nameplate reading. Declan Pierce, Chief Operating Officer. He picked up the nameplate, ran his thumb across the engraved letters, then quietly asked, "What happens now?" The new CEO answered without emotion. You leave. No escort. If you cooperate. No, he interrupted. I mean, what happens to me? Nobody answered, because for the first time in his adult life, no title existed to protect him. As he reached the conference room door, he stopped, turned back toward me. You planned every bit of this. I slowly stood. No, I planned one thing. What? I planned to give you every opportunity to become worthy of this company. You rejected every single one. He stared at me. I'll build something bigger. I nodded. I hope you do. But next time, build it. Don't expect someone else to hand it to you. He laughed bitterly. You really think you've won? I looked around the conference room. Walter was smiling. The directors looked relieved. The new owners were already discussing employee retention plans. Outside the glass walls, hundreds of workers were beginning another ordinary shift, completely unaware their jobs had just become far more secure. I looked back at my son. This was never about beating you. It was about saving them. He opened his mouth to answer. Before he could, his old company phone buzzed one final time. He looked down, eyed the screen, then closed his eyes. The message wasn't from me. It wasn't from the board. It was from his personal bank. Your mortgage refinancing application has been declined due to change in employment status. For the first time, real consequences had arrived, and they weren't coming from his father. They were coming from the life he'd built on a title that no longer existed. For the next 4 days, I didn't hear from Declan. No angry calls, no lawyers, no accusations, just silence. The kind of silence that follows when someone finally runs out of people to blame. Meanwhile, Northbridge Manufacturing began doing exactly what they'd promised. Warehouse workers received raises that had been frozen for 2 years. Safety upgrades started immediately. The retirement plan that Declan wanted to eliminate was restored. Walter came back. So did 3 supervisors who had resigned months earlier. Walking through the factory that week, I heard something I hadn't heard in a long time. People laughing, not because business was easy, because they no longer dreaded Monday mornings. Friday afternoon, the new CEO invited me to lunch. As we finished coffee, he asked, "Do you regret selling it?" I looked through the restaurant window toward one of our distribution centers. Employees were loading trucks. Forklifts moved steadily. Nothing had stopped. "No, I miss owning it, but I don't miss worrying whether one man's ego would destroy 800 families." He smiled. "That's why we wanted you involved." I frowned. "Involved?" He slid a folder across the table. Inside was a consulting agreement. No executive title, no office, no corner parking space. Just one sentence: senior advisor for employee development. "I thought I retired." "You did. This isn't management, it's mentorship. We'd like you to help train future leaders." I smiled. That I'd enjoy. The following Tuesday, Rennie knocked on my workshop door. "I thought you'd want these." She carried 2 cardboard boxes. Inside were the last items from my old office: a cracked coffee mug, my wife's framed photograph, the original brass nameplate, and one worn leather notebook. I smiled. "I forgot about this." Rennie laughed. "You carried it everywhere. It wasn't a diary. It was a notebook filled with names. Every employee hired since the company began. Beside each name, I'd written something personal. Daughter born, finished night school, beat cancer, bought first house. 40 years of lives, not payroll numbers. People, that's what the business had always been." I closed the notebook, satisfied. 2 weeks later, someone knocked on my front door. Declan. No expensive suit, no luxury watch, no company car, just jeans, work boots, and exhaustion. He looked older, not physically, emotionally. "I won't take much of your time." I nodded toward the porch. "We can sit." For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Finally, he said, "I had 6 job interviews. Nobody offered me a position." I wasn't surprised. News travels quickly in business, especially when executives leave under difficult circumstances. He looked down. "I thought people respected me." I answered quietly. "They respected your title. There's a difference." He nodded slowly. "I know that now." Then he reached into his backpack, pulled out the old plastic employee badge he'd worn as a teenager. The picture made me smile. He couldn't have been more than 16. Greasy hair, oversized work shirt, safety goggles hanging around his neck. I found it. I remembered something. "What?" "The first day I worked in the warehouse." I remembered it too. He'd complained about sweeping floors. I told him every manager should know how to clean the place before trying to run it. He smiled faintly. "I thought you were embarrassing me." "I know, you were trying to teach me." "Yes." He stared at the badge. "I never learned." He reached into his pocket again. This time, he handed me a folded business card. "I start Monday." I looked at it. A small fabrication company, 32 employees, maintenance supervisor, not CEO, not executive vice president, not even department head, just an honest job. "They know what happened?" they asked. I told them the truth. I looked at him carefully. "The whole truth?" He nodded. "I told them arrogance cost me everything." I handed the card back. "Then maybe you've finally become employable. For the first time in years." He laughed. Not the arrogant laugh from the parking garage, a humble one, the kind that comes after life has removed all the unnecessary pieces. Almost a year later, the local Chamber of Commerce invited me to speak to young business owners. They expected a presentation about entrepreneurship. Instead, I carried 2 objects onto the stage: the cracked coffee mug from my old office and the faded employee badge Declan had left behind after finding a new path. I held up the mug first. "This broke, but I kept it." Then the badge. This belonged to someone who believed a title made him important. I looked across the audience. It didn't. What made him valuable was finally earning respect without expecting inheritance. After the applause, several young entrepreneurs stayed behind to ask questions, not about profits, not about acquisitions, about leadership. That was worth more than any company I'd ever owned. People sometimes ask if selling Pierce Industrial was my revenge. They're wrong. Revenge would have been letting my son inherit the business exactly as it was, then watching him destroy it. I refused to sacrifice hundreds of honest employees just to teach one man a lesson. Justice looked different. Justice was making sure the workers kept their livelihoods. The customers kept a company they could trust. And my son was finally forced to build a future with his own hands instead of waiting for mine. The day he shoved me against that car, he called me an old fool. Maybe I was old, but I was wise enough to understand something he didn't. A family business isn't measured by who inherits it. It's measured by who protects the people inside it.